Ha! Look at those shoes, the bank manager bellowed, pointing at Marcus as soon as he stepped through the door. The laughter spilled across the polished lobby, sharp and mocking, cutting through the quiet hum of the bank like a whip. Marcus froze for a moment, the sound of the man's voice ricocheting in his ears, the eyes of nearby customers flicking between the manager and him. His sneakers, scuffed and patched in several places, squeaked lightly on the tiled floor, and the frayed laces danced with each hesitant step he took forward. The manager leaned back slightly, a cruel grin spreading across his face as if Marcus's mere presence, the wornness of his shoes, and the weight of his small backpack were the punchline to a private joke only he understood. "You planning to check your account or beg for spare change?" he sneered, voice dripping with condescension. Marcus's jaw tightened, the heat rising in his chest, but he refused to look away. He had walked miles after school, carrying the earnings from chores and errands, and now, in this sterile, intimidating lobby, he was being judged for what he wore rather than the effort it represented. Taking a deep breath, Marcus stepped closer, carefully setting his bundle of cash on the counter. His hands were steady, despite the burning embarrassment, and he met the manager's eyes with calm, unwavering defiance. The laughter faltered slightly, but the manager quickly recovered, smirking and leaning over the counter, clearly amused to see this small boy challenge him with nothing but a quiet confidence. "You really think you belong here?" the man said, shaking his head. Marcus didn't answer. He simply opened his small notebook, pages worn and frayed, and began counting every coin, every note, meticulously recording them with precise, deliberate strokes of his pencil. The manager's laughter slowly dissolved into a strange mix of curiosity and disbelief as Marcus continued, the boy's diligence and care contrasting starkly with the manager's earlier mockery. Patrons who had initially glanced over with mild interest now leaned forward subtly, watching Marcus handle his money with a sense of focus and determination that refused to be diminished by scorn. The manager leaned back slightly in his chair, still chuckling quietly under his breath, as if the very act of this child handling money in his presence was absurd. "Do you even know what to do with this?" he asked, voice dripping with condescension, the words sharp and almost tasting of disbelief. Marcus's lips pressed together, holding back the sting of humiliation, but he didn't answer immediately. Instead, he pulled out a small worn notebook from his backpack, the edges bent and pages frayed from years of careful use, and began to meticulously count the cash, coin by coin, note by note. Each movement was deliberate, measured, and calm, reflecting a discipline far beyond his years, cultivated through countless chores, errands, and moments of quiet responsibility. As he worked, his pencil scratched softly against the notebook, a steady sound that seemed to challenge the manager's earlier derision, almost as if it were a silent rebuttal to the mocking laughter. The manager, initially certain this would be a simple, comical encounter, now leaned forward slightly, curiosity mixing with lingering disbelief. Patrons in the background, who had only glanced at the scene with mild interest, now found themselves watching intently, drawn by the boy's composure and precision. Every detail of Marcus's demeanor, his focused gaze, the calm way he handled each coin, the quiet confidence in his posture, stood in sharp contrast to the manager's haughty, dismissive attitude. Even the smallest gestures, like the way he carefully aligned the notes on the counter before tallying them, communicated a deep sense of responsibility and intelligence. Marcus's worn sneakers squeaked softly as he shifted slightly to reach for a coin, the faint sound punctuating the tension in the room. The manager's smirk faltered for a brief moment as he watched Marcus work, his mind racing to reconcile the image of the boy in scuffed shoes with the methodical, competent precision he now displayed. Other employees glanced over, whispering quietly to each other, their curiosity piqued as they observed a scene they had not anticipated. A child demonstrating discipline, patience, and careful management of money with the seriousness of someone much older. Marcus continued his counting, his voice calm and deliberate as he read the totals aloud, each number punctuated with certainty, leaving no room for doubt or error. The very act of careful, diligent work began to transform the energy in the room. What had started as mockery and derision was slowly shifting toward quiet recognition of effort and skill. Marcus's calm, unwavering focus was a lesson in itself, proving that diligence and self-respect can quietly overcome even the most scornful judgment. The manager's laughter had begun as a wall meant to belittle him, but with every careful count and precise notation, Marcus chipped away at it, demonstrating that competence, integrity, and perseverance cannot be dismissed by appearances. Finally, after painstakingly verifying the totals, the manager looked up at Marcus, his expression transformed from scorn to cautious respect. "Well, this is impressive," he stammered, the words clumsy but sincere, as if he were trying to find the right way to acknowledge the boy's meticulous work. Marcus nodded, not needing praise, not needing to gloat, because he understood that true victories were quiet and personal. The transaction was complete, yet the real triumph lay in the acknowledgement of his competence, in the quiet dismantling of the manager's earlier arrogance, and in the subtle shift in the atmosphere of the entire bank. Patrons who had been whispering among themselves now looked at Marcus with newfound appreciation, exchanging nods and impressed glances, silently acknowledging the boy who had refused to be diminished by circumstance or appearance. Every detail of the bank, the polished counters, the softly gleaming tiles, the hum of computers in the background, seemed to fade into the background, leaving only the image of Marcus, standing tall despite the frayed sneakers and the worn backpack, embodying patience, focus, and discipline. The manager, fumbling through his paperwork, seemed momentarily aware of how badly he had misjudged Marcus, his smirk replaced by a hesitant, almost guilty glance. Other employees peeked over the counters, some with subtle smiles, others with awe in their eyes, recognizing the level of maturity and skill in a boy who, at first sight, appeared ordinary, even vulnerable. Marcus, noticing these reactions, felt no need to boast or react. He simply gathered his notebook and carefully slid the neatly counted bundle of coins and notes into his backpack, each motion deliberate, calm, and precise. In that small, unassuming act, Marcus communicated far more than words ever could. He communicated that dignity, competence, and perseverance were not defined by appearance, that respect could be earned quietly and firmly, and that patience and meticulous effort often spoke louder than mocking laughter. Outside the bank, sunlight bathed Marcus in a warm glow, illuminating the scuffed sneakers that had been a source of ridicule just moments ago. The worn shoes, once symbols of poverty and judgment, now seemed like badges of resilience, each scuff and fray telling the story of a boy who had worked, walked, and persevered through countless small challenges to reach this moment. Every coin he had counted, every careful note he had written, weighed more heavily now with significance, not just as money, but as proof of responsibility, integrity, and quiet strength. The city around him appeared sharper and more alive, every street and storefront somehow brighter, as if the world itself recognized the small yet monumental victory of a boy who had faced mockery, stood his ground, and emerged with dignity intact. Marcus's steps were steady and purposeful, each one echoing the rhythm of determination and self-respect he carried inside. The laughter of the manager that had greeted him at the door felt like a distant memory, overshadowed by the warmth of accomplishment and the growing awareness that appearances often mislead, while effort, intelligence, and integrity cannot be denied. Marcus's mind wandered briefly to the lessons his grandmother had taught him about patience, pride, and quiet perseverance, each memory reinforcing the strength that had carried him through the confrontation. He imagined the reactions of his friends and neighbors when he recounted the story, understanding that the lesson here was not in revenge or ridicule, but in resilience, focus, and self-respect. The worn sneakers, the scuffed notebook, the carefully counted coins, they were more than objects. They were symbols of his journey, his discipline, and the quiet triumph of determination over judgment. By the time he reached the familiar streets of his neighborhood, the sense of achievement had settled deep in his chest, mingling with pride, humility, and a renewed understanding of his own worth. Marcus walked taller than ever, not because of praise or recognition, but because he had proven, to himself and the world, that no laughter, no ridicule, and no judgment could define who he truly was. And in that realization, he felt a profound sense of freedom, a sense that the path forward was now lit not just by sunlight, but by the quiet glow of dignity, courage, and unwavering self-belief.